Hello again, guys. It is I, Frieza700, and today we are here to talk about the beginning of the War of Crusaders, also known as the First War of Crusaders, or also known as just the Crusades. So, what is it? Well, it was initially the conflict between the Dark Legion, Hronodin, and Ecclesia. This would be roughly 50 years after the War of Heroes. And the War of Heroes, well, the Second War of Heroes, I should be more specific. The Second War of Heroes is where the Lich Kiliani finally gets banished as God destroys him, and God would be Nibel. So not only did Nibel destroy him, he essentially caused so much destruction that it created this place known as the Altar of Destruction. Now, the Altar of Destruction was made by Kiliani, but it's more or less just a symbol of God. And the humans have since claimed it as a holy ground. To them, it has been the basis of their religion. This is why Ecclesia has gained so much power. Now, to set up the preface, essentially, Hexter and the Dark Legion just won a war 5 years ago. That was a relatively minor war. It wasn't groundbreaking. It wasn't ridiculously over the top. It was literally over just one city. That's all the war was about, was Iran. But the Dark Legion won it, and that's all that really needed to be said. Besides that, they were pretty much at peace. They forgot all about war for 5 years. But it's been, 50 years since the last previous major engagement. So the time period's kind of a little weird and wonky. Just work with me now, because the time period's going to get a little bit crazier, especially during the events of the War of the Crusades. So the consequences of the War of Crusades is that it would eventually lead into the Ankh-Ablosim War, and then sometime later, we don't know when, we don't have much lore on it yet, because Kingdom Under Fire 2 hasn't fully described it, but there would be a second War of Crusaders. So, this is going to be interesting. So in the beginning, this war was started off when Greyhampton was found razed to the ground. Totally burned, no survivors, the women and children were killed. Now, this was discovered on a diplomacy mission, more or less, by General Gerald. He was being summoned to Youngsburg to attend mass with the Ecclesians. This was more or less a diplomacy meeting, so that way Hronodin and Ecclesian troops could be together and more or less form a tighter bond. Because remember, Ecclesia and Hronodin are kind of on neutral terms with each other. Ecclesia wishes to be more friendly with Hronodin, but there's always a motive for why they want to be friends. Whereas Hronodin's more down to the ground. They've been dealing with the bloodiest of battles, so they see things more practical. They do have a religion, but they don't view it as more important than livestock or more important than their own very lives. They're more, as I've said before in my other lore video, they're more independent people, more countrymen type. They're the more relatable guys. They're not zealous, but they do fight tenaciously because they're defending their home. They're not really fighting for an ideology, whereas the Ecclesians are. They're religious. So, on the way to Youngsburg, as you can see here on the map, this is a handmade map because the map in Kingdom of Fire Crusaders is pretty nice, so I had to picture it all together. But Greyhampton was right behind Essa. So, on the way from Essa to Youngsburg, General Gerald stumbles across Greyhampton, which was totally on fire, and it was already destroyed. And while they were there, they discovered some Dark Legion, Dark Elves specifically, to which they engaged. And from there, they just simply went back to Essa and reported to General Hugh, who is the main leader of the Hronodin army, that there have been Dark Elves sighted, and they razed Greyhampton, which was extremely interesting because there was no real provocation to the war. So in a few days' time, the King Saul of Hronodin signs an agreement with Ecclesia that they will officially go to war with the Dark Legion. Whether or not Ecclesia knew it, that's a whole nother story, and I'm going to do a lore video on that. For those of you who don't know, I will definitely cover a lore video on the behind scenes of the war. So, the agreement reached between Ecclesia and Hronodin was signed as this. Ecclesia wants to help crusade with Hronodin to reclaim the Holy Ground, because after all, Ecclesia is religious. But, where's Hronodin's piece in all this agreement? What do they gain? Well, it's simple. Ecclesia agrees that even if they take the Holy Ground back from the Dark Legion, Ecclesia will hold no ground. They will not own it. Any ground claim during this crusade will be given direct ownership of Hronodin. This is most unusual and most generous of Ecclesia. So again, this starts to beg the question, what is Ecclesia getting out of this? This is, again, a behind-the-scenes lore video that I will make, but let's continue onwards. So, with Hronodin's aid in the reclamation of the Holy Ground, they basically start forming forces and start forming plans. But the issue is that Ecclesia is not showing any activity as of yet. So, the beginning of the war started essentially at Raven Meadow. Now, what happened was Hronodin formed an army with all of its generals, and you can see here on the map that there's kind of like these tree-like drawings in these cliffs. Well, it's very hard to move your army through that, especially when your army has to carry heavy ordnance like catapults and such like that. So really, the only viable route you could go is through Raven Meadow, which is this vast open space here. So this is what they did. Turns out the Dark Legion took it over 5 years ago, and what they did with it was, since they realized it was a choke point, they built a wall. And they had patrols always at this wall in Raven Meadow. So in order to deal with it, the humans brought sappers, catapults, and a large contingent of infantry. The infantry is more or less meant to wipe out the patrols, while the sappers and the catapults would destroy the walls or open them up. Well, this battle was a mess, which to me would indicate later how the entire war would be, which is a fucking mess. At the beginning of the battle, the orcs and the ogres were a little caught off guard by this huge presence of Hronodin forces. And the Hronodin forces opened fire with archers and catapults, to which the orcs wasted no time in engaging. This is where it gets a little interesting. Around a third of the human infantry contingent got wiped out from this initial engagement. So, besides that though, they still have 2/3 of their infantry that easily wiped the enemy orcs and ogres out. So now the catapults and the sappers and the archers are already at their designated positions a little bit ahead of time, a little bit before the infantry could get finished. Well, now the other patrols of the Dark Elves and the orcs and ogres are now attacking the sappers and the catapults. This is a big issue. Already the war just started, the battle just started, and already it looks like Hronodin may have to call it quits. Because if they can't get past this wall, they're fucked. They can't go around and just continue onwards. They need those catapults. They need the heavy ordnance. They need that supply line to be open as possible if they're going to push this deep into Dark Legion territory. So this wall going down is very fucking crucial. So they arrive. Sappers have been wiped out by the Dark Elves, which is a big problem. Then the infantry moves on to rendezvous with the second catapults. And the catapults have been wiped out by archers. This is not good. Then they finally come across the third catapult. This is the final one. This is the one at the northernmost side of the walls. This is the last possible effort Hronodin could ever achieve to breaking through the wall and continuing their crusade. Just thankfully, they come right at the nick of time, right when the orcs were about to kill all the catapult users and destroy the catapults for good. Thankfully, they were stopped, and the walls were destroyed, which prompted the Dark Legion to retreat, as they knew that this was too much for them to handle, so they just pulled back. Especially now that the walls are open, Velon needs to know right now, ASAP, as soon as fucking possible, that they're under attack. This was a victory, and at first the humans were very grateful. They figured that this was too easy. Little did they know, though, that this plan could have failed really easily. And this is something that the generals are more aware of, is that this battle was a great success. Awesome. We breached their walls. We breached into their territory. Now their territory is open for us to claim because it's very poorly defended. But on the flip side, this battle was really close. And the losses were a little interesting. The humans typically lost around 300 men. The Dark Legion, on the other hand, lost somewhere between 500 and 1,000. It's really unsure how much they lost, as the numbers were kind of skewed, and also it's dependent on the player's actions. But it's somewhere between 500 and 1,000, and since they did lose a third of their infantry, plus they lost so many catapults and sappers, it's a fair guess to say they lost around 300 men, which is already pretty interesting casualties for just the opening crusade of the war. Well, now that humanity breached the Raven Meadow, essentially what they do is they set up a forward base. This is where the main Hyronnid army with General Hugh and General Gerald and Captain Walden, they would set up a forward base. This way, most of their forces can recuperate and also devise certain strategies as to how to proceed. Because the goal is to take over the Holy Ground, which is Hexter. But they have to do it in a way that doesn't leave them exposed in the ass. So they have to essentially analyze and do reconnaissance. They took over a few commanders, taken out a few Dark Legion patrols, and this is where it gets interesting. So, Ecclesia hasn't done shit. All they've done is prepared for war. As right now, Ecclesia does have a camp in the Holy Ground. They've always had a camp in the Holy Ground. But now it's been under heavy attack because in the Holy Ground is an ancient artifact that's so powerful it could summon portals to another dimension. It could make meteors rain down from the sky. This is how powerful this ancient artifact is, known as the Ancient Heart. So Ecclesia's just been defending the Altar of Destruction, waiting to find this object, but also making sure the Dark Legion doesn't find this object. Well, since the walls just opened, Hyronnid was pretty happy about the success, but Ecclesia was a little bit more happy because now they're getting a little bit of relief. Now the Dark Legion's no longer gunning them. Now the Dark Legion's more focused on something new. So, speaking about the Dark Legion, let's flip sides. Let's talk about the Dark Legion, how they react to the war. Well, the Dark Legion was really caught off guard. This sent a lot of shock through their ranks, as Raven Meadow was believed to be well enough defended that it could hold the humans. But instead what happened was their forces were utterly smashed. They lost almost more than double the forces that the humans lost. And this really intimidated a lot of the Dark Elves. A lot of the Dark Elves were scared, and they kept talking about how this might be a little too much. The humans might be too powerful. They might be too strong. The Orcs, they're a little too simplistic to really care. The only thing that they were more alarmed about was the fact that the humans are attacking their home. That's all the Orcs cared about. But the Dark Elves were more scared about the shock value, the craziness, the idea that those fucking apes just smashed aside their defenses that they've been preparing for 5 years. And they did it so easily and so quickly. They thought that they would have to siege it, which could take days, weeks, months. No, humans destroyed it overnight. So this was a little shocking. Now, this shock didn't last too long, obviously. In fact, it only lasted maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, because what happened later was Hyronnid sent a relief force to Hexter, to the Altar Destruction specifically. And this relief force consisted of 3,000 troops. And this would consist of catapults, spearmen, horses, and archers with regular infantry. Well, Ecclesia tried to aid this army when it was intercepted by Lucretia and Commander Rumen of the Dark Elves, but even their Storm Riders didn't really help at all. Instead, what happened was less than 30 troops of the Dark Elves was killed. Meanwhile, the human army was totally fucking wiped out. All 3,000 troops wiped out by this advanced special army, which would be later the main drive of the army, which is Lucretia and Commander Rumen. This was shocking, to say the least. The humans didn't really care about it. They were more distracted by their more immediate concerns to realize that their army got utterly wiped out. They figured that it got wiped out from just dealing with waves and waves and waves of orcs. Little did they realize it got wiped out by just a few of Dark Elves. And specifically, Dark Elves alone. The only thing that the orcs were there for was to kill the cavalry, which was around 15 to 30 horsemen. And that's scary, for sure. But it's even more scary to think that these elite Yenachary Dark Elves just wiped out 3,000 men. Now, of course, there's around 300 to 500 Dark Elves, but still, 3,000 wiped out? That's scary. The location that this army was really located by the Dark Elves was, at first they were located at Dryglade, which was marked here on the little blue dot. This Dryglade was essentially where they intercepted patrols, and this is where they got their first view of this 3,000 army. But when they intercepted them up here. This would be known as Wicto. And Wicto is nothing really remarkable. This is just where the army was killed and fell. You see how close it is to the altar of destruction. And it's more interesting to note that this wasn't the main force. This was just a small army. So already the humans just lost an army, but they also just lost a few captains, which is not good. Now let's take a flip side again. So what did the humans think? Well, this was the beginning of the war, and so far it looked good to them. They didn't realize that they just lost a whole army for literally nothing. They figured that that army would have been destroyed, but it would have at least taken as many bastards down with it. So right now the humans are feeling overconfident. They actually feel like that they can take on an immortal warlord. They feel like that they could take out Veland and maybe even take out Iran. That's how great they're feeling right now. They feel like that they could just get this ball rolling. They've already killed a few generals. They've already killed hundreds and 1,000 of dark elves. My bad, I don't mean hundreds of thousands. That's too much. But they've already killed hundreds, and they've even killed thousands of dark elves and orcs, so they're feeling really confident right now. But little do they realize that this isn't the roughest part of the war. The humans thought that Raven Meadow was the roughest part of the war. Little do they realize the roughest part of the war is coming, and it's not going to be rough for the Dark Legion. It's actually going to be rough for them. And this is where the war will start turning tides really fucking quickly. Right now, the humans are more interested in using terrain and using underhand tactics to win against the Dark Legion, so that way their casualty rates match up with the Dark Legions. Because after all, as I said, they did lose 3,000 men. So to make up for this, what they figured was they would take over the Glaucus River, which is marked here. And this river essentially has a dam on it that, once released, will release such a powerful tidal wave that it would easily kill an orc, easily kill a human, easily kill a dark elf. And the goal was to hold this choke point, so that way when Rainier comes by, who's an immortal warlord, and the Lord of Hexter, that when he comes by, they would just drown him, and this would destroy all of Hexter's rulership, which would again spread anarchy, and this would divide the Dark Legion again. This didn't work out. Instead, what happened was both forces took heavy losses. The humans lost somewhere around, again, 500 to maybe 700, whereas the Dark Legion, they lost a lot of orcs. They didn't really lose much in the way of Dark Elves. They lost a lot of orcs. So we would be looking at, realistically, somewhere between, I would say, 500 and 800. So slightly, maybe 100 more than the humans, but still within the same range. And the reason why it was so dead even was because you saw similar forces. So you saw General Gerald fighting General Lucretia. You almost saw General Hugh get killed by Lucretia. So this is a very interesting situation where the main driving forces of both armies have clashed, and it's clear that both sides are pretty evenly matched, but the difference is strategic value. So if you attack Lucretia, the Dark Legion, you would have to kill her and then kill another general and then another general and another general. They're not going to back down. But the humans, on the other hand, we're more sentimental. We tend to love our brethren. So if you kill General Hugh, who's the leader of the whole Hronodin army, then the whole Hronodin army is going to fall. So ironically, the whole human plan was to take over Glaucus to cause anarchy and disbandment in the Hexter forces. When reality was, if General Hugh died, that would have happened to their forces. So besides that, this has been Freezer 700. I hope you guys enjoyed. The next video is going to be the second part of the war, where we're going to talk about the sides turning, where all of a sudden the humans are going to start going on the defense, and the Dark Elves and the Orcs are going to go on the offense. Besides that, this has been Freezer 700. I hope you guys enjoyed. See you guys next time. If you click subscribe, please click on the bell icon so that way you actually get notified when I upload videos. I see a lot of you guys have this issue. It's not a big deal for me. It's just for you guys, when you guys complain why you don't see my videos upload, that's why. Besides that, see you guys next time.